Hello everyone, this is PKO Entertainment and we are back again, and here now we have another review in our Unrated and Underappreciated series, and this edition, which came from a viewer request recently, we will focus on a terrific thriller, Breakdown. Released in May 2nd, 1997, it stars Kurt Russell, JT Walsh, Kathleen Quinlan, and was directed by Jonathan Mostow. And the setup here is that we have happily married couple Jeff and Amy Taylor driving cross country when their truck breaks down, and along comes another truck driver played by JT Walsh, who comes to their aid and offers to help. Jeff chooses to stay with their own van whilst Amy goes with Walsh to call for repair. Jeff sees that the battery connections are broken and reconnects them and starts to the car. He drives to the diner where Amy said she would be, but finds out that she's not there. Increasingly worried, Jeff asks around people at the diner, contacts the police. He suddenly finds that not everything is what it seems and that both his and Amy's life is in danger. For me, Breakdown is a terrific thriller full of intrigue and suspense and ever-increasing tension. The final climax aside, this is a movie that is more driven by narrative rather than action, as we followed the one character through numerous directions and scenarios and different situations, and we see different things happen to that character and you're constantly hooked from start to finish. This is really a throwback movie that focuses a lot more on the contained, the smaller scale, the self-isolation, and it's really different to what we saw particularly in event and action movies within the 90s, where it's a much more about the larger scale and the higher concept. And Breakdown, because it's far more restrained and it's built a lot more, as I mentioned before, in terms of the plot and where the story actually goes, it's actually a better movie for it. It actually shows that you don't need multiple action scenes or effects all the time to generate a compelling movie, and Jonathan Mostow handles this very well. The movie moves at a nice steady pace as you see Jeff come across different situations, and it constantly builds the tension and you're constantly wondering what's going on and where things will lead to, and I think it's terrifically mapped out in terms of a story and narrative. Now, movies like this wouldn't mean much without a strong acting performance to carry the film, and luckily here you have Kurt Russell in the lead, who for me is without question one of the all-time great actors. He's one of those exceptionally versatile actors who could play any role, whether it's the hero, whether it's the villain, whether it's someone who's morally compromised, whether it's much more of a complex, ambiguous character. Kurt Russell can literally play any character within any type of film, and it shows how much depth he's got in terms of his acting and his ability. He's very similar to the likes of Michael Douglas or Nick Nolte, one of those great actors who can really shift from different tones and direction in movies and completely feel comfortable. It doesn't feel forced or overly deliberate. He's just a natural fit for any typical role, and Breakdown here as Jeff is that typical kind of everyman role. Yes, we learn very early on that he's rich, he owns his own business and he's very wealthy, but he still shows that sign of that vulnerability and appealing character, and it just helps that you hook you to the character so much. You know, Kurt Russell, he's done so many great films. You could spend hours talking about his own filmography. You look at the likes of Escape from LA, The Thing, Big Trouble in Little China, Tombstone, and also Dark Blue, which is a great, terrific movie, and also I feel is a movie that isn't very appreciated upon its release or after, and I will also do a review of that within this series as well. And in this movie as well, Kurt Russell's performance is so key because we see the ordeal that Jeff goes through, we see all the emotions in terms of his vulnerability, the stress, the paranoia, the resolve, everything that he goes through, and Russell conveys all of these emotions in a brilliantly performance. Fantastic, and I think that's key to what makes Breakdown successful. If you're going to have this isolated movie, it really helps that you have a lead performance and a leading actor who's able to carry the movie. If you had a lesser actor or a lesser performance, this movie would fail, and luckily for all of us, we have the great Kurt Russell in this role. Breakdown was also notable for the final performance of JT Walsh as an actor. He also starred in great films such as A Few Good Men, Nixon, and also The Negotiator, which you can also find a review on this channel as well. I also liked the music, which added a lot of tension and atmosphere. It was composed by Basil Poledouris, and if you know anything about your movies, he provided the epic scores for both Conan the Barbarian and the likes of RoboCop as well. Just amazing scores, two of, I think, of the best musical scores within the 80s movie. So great music here, and I think it serves this movie just in ramping up the atmosphere and the tension as we see the different situation that Jeff comes under as he becomes more desperate to reconnect with Amy. It's just fantastic music as well. So if I had to give a score for Breakdown, I would give it an 8.1 out of 10. As I mentioned before, it's really a throwback to those typical action thrillers that we saw from the past, where maybe you would have a lower budget, so there'd be a lot more concentration in terms of the narrative and the character, and really focusing more on smaller scale situations and really ramping up the tension for a maximum effect and constantly compelling you to the story. I think it's a terrific film. Yes, we get the spectacular climax towards the end, and you could argue that perhaps maybe it's a bit rushed, and maybe it doesn't mesh well with what we've seen throughout the previous 80 or odd minutes throughout the movie. But I think overall it builds to a nice crescendo, and I think in terms of what happens throughout the movie, I still found it a very exciting and spectacular climax to end the movie on. So if we focus on the release of Breakdown, on a budget of 30.8 million, it managed to gross 50.2 million. Now, you could say, well, it kind of made its money back, but I think in the era of the 90s, it didn't really make the impact that perhaps they were hoping for, and it certainly doesn't get talked about when we look at Kurt Russell's filmography, the previous films I mentioned before. Breakdown doesn't get the same mention or appreciation as such. Now, I think mainly the reason for this, because as I mentioned before, it's much more lower in scale and it's a much more restrained type of action thriller. So it kind of paled in comparison to the big event movies that we saw, particularly in the 90s, where everything was very large scale, everything was very high concept, whether it was the more traditional contemporary action movies or whether it was more the CGI science fiction blockbusters. Breakdown probably felt a bit lacking or a bit lackluster in comparison. So I think that was the biggest reason why it didn't connect well, or it didn't generate more money at the box office than of what they were hoping for, particularly the studios. And I think Kurt Russell as well, you know, I mentioned he's a very prolific actor, but maybe he wasn't the big box office powerhouse towards the end of the 90s. Even if you look at the movies that he'd starred in throughout this run in the 90s, you look at Tombstone or Stargate or Backdraft, those are much more action orientated spectacle movies. Now, Breakdown minus the climax isn't as spectacle, so maybe again Kurt Russell fans probably felt that this wasn't as appealing as the previous work that he had done within the early 90s as well. Perhaps if Breakdown had been released maybe in the 70s or the 80s, it may have garnered even more attention. But I think it's a shame because, as I've mentioned throughout this review, I think it's a terrific thriller. I actually think a lot of modern day action films that we see a lot, particularly on likes of streaming, could actually learn a lot from Breakdown, in that you can have a lower budget movie, and as I mentioned before, you don't necessarily need great CGI effects or multiple quick edits or lots of fancy gimmickry in terms of the visuals of a movie to generate a powerful and thrilling and exciting action thriller. It's more about how you set the story up and how you pull the viewer in with great music, great tension, and of course it's bolstered by a magnificent leading performance from Kurt Russell. So Breakdown is definitely a movie that I feel was unrated and underappreciated and deserves far more recognition during and after its release. So those are my thoughts and review on Breakdown, a terrific action thriller. Let me know what you think in the comments below if you've managed to see this film. Do you think it should have got more deserved praise, or do you think it's one of the more weaker efforts within the filmography of Kurt Russell? Also, if you have any other suggestions, as was the case with this movie, of any films that you feel were underappreciated upon its release and you think they deserve more time and attention, let me know in the comments below. And if I've seen the movie, then by all means I'll provide a review also for it as well. Please also hit those like and subscribe and notification buttons to help me provide more high quality content for you in the future. This Unrated Underappreciated series has proven very popular, so I love reviewing classic, great, brilliant movies. So by all means, if you have further suggestions and you'd like to see me provide more reviews, then just let me know in the comments below. So that's it for now. Take care of yourselves, stay at safe distances, and I will see you very, very soon.